Good morning. It is another Tuesday morning here in 2023, and this is the Kitchings Table. Welcome to our show. As always, I am your host, Earl Kitchings, and joining me is Miss Ronline Cannady on this beautiful Tuesday morning. Good morning, Ronline.
Good morning. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for asking. I hope your day has already started on a very positive note.
Yes.
All right, well, that's what we like to hear. I always want to start everything as positive as possible because over the course of 24 hours, a lot of things happen and can cause discourse and aggravation and humiliation and disappointment. And we get so caught up at times on those things that the good things that come out of life, we scan over and we just don't talk about them and don't reference them and we miss out. So we like to welcome you again for joining us here on the Kitchings Table, here on Awesome Radio 106.9 FM, WBISLP. Check us out on our social media formats at Roku, GPAC23, Facebook Live, and of course, YouTube. So today, we're going to continue to talk about the literacy dynamic. It is a very important part of what we do each and every day. It is very important to help in the education of our children that, as we spoke about last week, Ronline, reading and writing. I mean, it seemed like when we were in school, teachers basically said those two subject matters in tandem, reading and writing, or writing and reading, or when they did the little jingle, reading, writing, and arithmetic, not arithmetic, but reading, writing, arithmetic.
Right.
So the reading coupled with the writing are integral parts of literacy. And we're going to talk about the books. They call them volumes. We call it, in a mathematical term, they would be called a set. It's interesting that books are called volumes. When we talk about volumes, we talk about the quantity of something in liquid form for volume. But when we talk about volumes in a book, we're talking about a set of books. And there aren't many sets of books that have been published, but this particular set of books that we're talking about today, it was the predecessor to the internet and online learning. And they were called encyclopedias. Encyclopedia. That's a good spelling bee word, encyclopedia.
Yes.
Right? And they wait for you to spell it. And uh, I'm reminded as I say that of Akilah and the Bee, the movie Akilah and the Bee with Kiki Palmer and Lawrence Fishburne, how dynamic she was in that movie, learning how to spell. And when we give our children the proper tools for learning, the proper environment for learning and not being distracted, the proper teaching and the teaching methods that provide them with all the information and a structure they need in order to do education at the highest level. Uh, this is why we talk about literacy in this form because we must continue to teach our children to learn at a very high level. So when we talk about this volume of books, these encyclopedias, for those of you who may not know what an encyclopedia is, we're going to give you some history on that. For those of you who remember encyclopedias, we're going to take you back down memory lane. And I think Ronline said she had about 5 different versions of encyclopedias in her house.
Two. I had access to more, but yes, two.
And what two were those, Ronline?
The World Book Encyclopedia and the Britannica.
I see.
And the
World Book.
Britannica was the bomb.com.
Okay. And of those two encyclopedia sets, which one did you prefer?
I thought I preferred the World Book
Mm.
Encyclopedia, but once I received the Britannica, then I realized, wow, that was, like I said, that was the bomb.com. that had everything you needed in order to finish out your reports and score very high on it as well.
And because they came in a set and they probably were delivered to homes in maybe 2 or 3 separate boxes, just because the weight of those books were so massive. But once you got them, and for those who were able to have bookshelves and put them on the bookshelf, you got those books on the bookshelf, and it's like a piece of gold. They just stood out. They dominated all the other books on the bookshelf. You could have all these other fine books that were written by a lot of fine people, but those encyclopedias, like they were like at the top of the mountain. Like, well, yeah, all those books down there are nice, but we're the encyclopedias.
Yes.
And I want you to know what the word encyclopedia means. Complete instruction. How about that? Complete instruction. That's what encyclopedia means.
Okay.
So when we are talking about learning, and encyclopedias, as we said, came in a set, or they call them volumes, individually booked, but it was like a dictionary. They started out with the A volume all the way to the XYZ volume. So in the set of encyclopedias, instead of having the 26 books based on the alphabets, you may have about 20 to 22 books, because some information under a certain letter was not very large. But for instance, like the B and the C, they would break that up into 2 books, BA through BI, and then BO through BU, and that would make up the books. And of course, I think the smallest between the XYZ and the Q, I think those were the smallest books that they published. What do you think?
Yes, I believe my Q and R were together.
Okay.
QRS maybe.
QRS. Well, it's a lot of S stuff out there. So I can see Q and R, but I definitely know that X, Y, and Z was always one book, because
All one book. You're right.
just like the dictionary, there aren't many words that are spelled with the X, Y, and the Z. But altogether, these books were the predecessor to the internet, as I stated. And before you had online learning, these books were the way we got as much information as possible. You could come home one day and just pull one of those volumes off and flip through the pages and find something that you want to learn about, or something you have to report on. And it was always great to be able to have those books, because you could do your homework at home. And for those families who could not afford those books, you had to go to the library or use a friend's or other family members' books if they had them. Uh, Ronline, do you remember as we talk about these very valuable books, do you happen to recall what those books might have cost your parents?
I know the first set that I had for the 70-year version, it was a little over $2,000. And the last set I had, it was almost 4,000.
Okay. So if parents made a purchase of these books, these very valuable books, they made a sacrifice for their children's education. And if you've got, 2 or 3 kids in the house, they're close in age and they're in school at the same time, those books were priceless as to what they would allow your children to do. Excuse me. So the sacrifice that a parent would make, you say $2,000 to $4,000.
And for
That's a lot. That's a
the
lot of money.
money, right?
And just to think about, carrying that bill, because truth be told, Ronnie, back in the 60s, uh, there might have been some vehicles that were just a little bit more than the cost of a set of encyclopedias.
That
When
is
you
correct.
when you, when you think about when we talk about cost, and I know that might be hard for some folks to fathom. And a set of books didn't cost as much as a car. Well, cars, in the $5,000 range or a little bit less back in the 50s and 60s. And if you're talking about a set of books costing $2,000, it's quite a that's a monthly note that you really have to take some time out of that budget to take care of. But again, you sacrifice on one end for your child's education on the other end. So you may not have always had some of the things you actually needed sometimes that you didn't have to have, but those books were just, as I said, they were priceless to the value of learning.
Yes. And they held so much history for people who don't know what the encyclopedias hold. I did find an online subscription of Britannica. If anyone is interested, the price for that is very low. You can go out there and decide, what is best for you. They do allow you to do a search in that engine of the Britannica, so you get a chance to see what kind of information is out there.
And when we hear the word encyclopedia, we hear the pedia part. And in today's time on computer, we put the wink in front of the pedia. So now we have the Wikipedia, which basically is a source of information online, as they call it, digital information. And this abundance, I definitely know that the amount of information that is out there now uh, far exceeds what would have been placed in encyclopedias during our uh, childhood educational years, simply because so much is going on and we're so much in tune to the rest of the world and what's going on throughout the world. The world, probably because of the information that was so compressed in those books, was not anywhere close to the amount of information we can gather from around the world on a daily basis in this day and time. And when I was thinking about that particular concept of a book, and these books date back as far back from some research, they may not be in the same format they are now, but they date back to the 70s AD. And that's thousands of years ago that these books have basically started out and over time developed into what we have come to see now. And if you say you can still go out and order a set of encyclopedias, just from the standpoint of having the books on your bookshelf, I mean, I'm sure the information is as current as they can make it, but just the fact that no matter whether it's current or it's dated, the information is still valuable because some of the dated information has not changed. We've added to it, but it still is. When you talk about famous people, I remember looking through the encyclopedias, and they always had the history of and the bios of our presidents, starting with George Washington, all the way through the latter 60s, early 70s. And they would have photographs. It's just not all content is photographs. And some information could be very extended. Some information could be a couple of paragraphs. And when we are engaged in teaching and wanting our children to learn, this is where we need to be from the standpoint of literacy, because teaching uh, the information in these books. And of course, if you can't read it, then you certainly can't write about what was in it if you have to do a report. Is there one particular subject that caused you some grief in having to do a report, Ronline, and the information could just not be found?
No. Well, in the World Book Encyclopedia, sometimes your information was just on one or two pages,
Mm-hmm.
and you were limited in that. But when I received the Britannica, you had several pages that you can reference to. And then sometimes it'll tell you to see whatever else, so you can go and reference that and gather more information. And like I said, my grades began to increase because of that. particular feature right there, being able to, especially if you did something with history that included maps and things like that, because
Mm.
with the atlas as well. So you can go and get a good look at what, the countries look like. Then it might have had some references about the different places and things like that. So it talked about those things in detail, so you're able to just keep writing, keep going, or whatever. But don't make the mistake though and write that word for word.
I think they would call that plagiarism if you're
Yes,
writing
yes,
it
yes. Hmm.
verbatim, word for word. Just, and I think a lot of students, I can recall some students, when they found the information, they just start writing.
Hmm.
Whatever was in the book, they just wrote it just like it was. And of course, teachers can really tell when you wrote your words and you just copied what you saw in the book so that you could get a report or a paper done. And I always thought it was kind of funny when we had to do reports. And some students, man, they would come in and their reports would be in the little three-pronged folders and looking all nice and pristine. They have a cover page, and they may, depending on what you're reporting on, it may be 5, 6, 7 pages of information written down. And then there were some students, they would just bring in one page, you know,
Hmm.
no
Hmm.
folder, no nothing. They would just, turn it in. And it's like,
No type of presentation.
and teachers used to always talk about the EC,
Mm.
Ronline, extra credit.
Yes,
Get you
yes.
some extra credit.
Mhm.
You're 2 points away from an A or 2 points away from a B, and that extra credit pushes you over the top. So that folder could be that extra credit, or as you stated, if it was a project that caused you to need to use a map, drawing out that map, and wait, Ronley, wait, not only drawing the map, but coloring the map. So
Yes.
now you have to have colored pencils in order to color the maps. There were no markers back then. You had crayon or you had colored pencils. And
Hmm.
the pencils worked a little bit better than the crayon because crayon kind of laid it on heavy, but you could really do a good job with the pencils. So the extra credit that you could get from doing maybe 30 minutes more of work on something made a difference, because if you're striving to always make A's and you need that extra credit, and the teacher said, well, for extra credit, if you do this, you'll get some extra credit. Okay. Now, for those of us who didn't mind that, hey, but for those kids who really could care less, they turned in that one page, or they turned in the folder and it would just be that one page. They got hip to doing the folder part, but they just put in that one page.
Hmm.
So when I see the supplies every year that the students are given, when we fill these backpacks and their folders and pens and pencils, I think when we were coming up, we made an effort not to waste. We didn't waste materials. If you got a pack of paper, if you got a pack of paper that was 200 sheets, it made no sense to put all 200 sheets in your notebook, because of course what's going to happen is somebody's going to ask you, can I get a piece of paper from you? Can I get a piece of paper? And the next thing you know, after that first month, you don't have any more paper. So
Right.
you strategically fill that notebook up with paper, and you strategically didn't take but one or two pencils to school. But one of the things that I really enjoyed when we moved from elementary school to junior high school, or middle school, as they say today, was the fact that we went from writing with pencils to writing with a pen. And one of the favorite pens that I think those who had it was a fountain pen, where you put the ink in the pen and it flowed out. Man, that was something special, man. And you treasured that pen. It's like you didn't let anybody borrow that pen. Now you can borrow my stick pen. The big pens were a big deal. You could borrow that, but my fountain pen, oh no. Oh no.
Mhm.
And if you wrote your report up in that fountain pen, oh man, that might get you some extra
It's
credit.
correct.
That might get you some extra credit. And of
Mhm.
course, if you could write very well, oh my goodness, the teacher would be so impressed. So that might go from an A to an A plus.
Yes.
And so those books that we're speaking of, we're just kind of giving you some filler as to how school and the obtaining of education and knowledge was back then. It was very critical because you spoke of the Britannica, you spoke of the World Book. There was another company called Collier. They came out with an encyclopedia. The encyclopedias I had was called New Standard Encyclopedias. And so there were quite a few manufacturers or publishers of the books, but the creme de la creme, the Rolls Royce, the platinum, if you would, of all encyclopedias was Britannica.
Yes.
And as I stated, if you didn't have those books at home, uh, it was always you had to make way to find a way to get to the library. And as we grew up, there were not always a lot of libraries in our communities. There might have been one or two, man, and sometimes you could go in there and see, man, you might run into your whole class in the library trying to get that report done.
Mhm.
Some teachers did not, they did, as they say, didn't play the radio with you. So if they wanted their stuff in, they wanted it, it's written and double spaced, and they. So we thought those were some real hard times, but as we look back and say, well, the discipline and the structure that they put into us for learning and being educated was so phenomenal, and so thankful that we had those type of teachers who filled us with those type of ways of doing our work. And I always felt like I was in competition in elementary school because, of course, it always seemed that the girls in the class had more favor with the teacher than the boys. So there seemed to be this automatic uh, thought that they were smarter. And I was out proving that no, you aren't the smartest pencil in the box. I love the competition. I love being in class competing and doing the work and hearing the accolades from the teacher. And it was nothing like healthy competition. And I think that again helped many of us excel in our literacy, especially when we got to reading, because the teacher would call on different students to read out loud. And that caused some kids to melt down. You remember that?
I do. I do.
And if you weren't prepared, if you're not learning and practicing your vocabulary words, it could really cause you to just have a meltdown, and you get stuck on a word, or you get stuck and you're reading out loud and you get to a word you can't really formalize, and your peers would say the word out of the book for you, and you read a little further and get to another word and they would say it out loud to you, and after a while you get frustrated and you say, I know that word. You don't have to tell me, I know it. Because after you've been given your chance to read and you've taken up 5 minutes to read a paragraph, it's like,
Yes, and then they get impatient and want to read for you, like, hey, it's this, it's that. I was reading Michelle Obama's book called Becoming, and I'm hoping that she had a great birthday last week, and it was oversight on my part to wish her a happy birthday on our show. But let me tell you, her mother started her reading in the library as well.
mhm.
So I'm sure that if there were words that she didn't understand, she had the dictionary. Her mother had the cue cards. Remember those?
Oh yeah, oh
Uh,
yeah.
so, made her own flashcards and things like that. Well, she was in classroom one day, and the teacher asked her what the word was, and it was the color white. She couldn't get it to save her life.
Really?
She knew what it was, but could not say it. And
Hmm.
then finally, when it was pronounced for her, she was just so down on herself. So I know what it's like to be tripped up on words. Even today, I think you were helping me with some a few a few hours ago. And so, I'm just so
Guantanamo.
hey,
Guantanamo.
yes, reading and comprehension was never my strong suit. So I'm thankful that it's like just spell it out. Don't trip over the word. Just spell it out so you keep going. But yes, those things. And this is why we're talking about literacy today because as we've discovered, it makes a difference when you can physically hold a book in your hand as opposed to reading it online. So as you said, the words that you had to help me with or whatever, now they have a little fancy little thing on there that helps you pronounce the word
Hmm.
when you key it in or what have you. But yes, I mean, those things that we had were valuable in our education system. And I'm so sorry that they've taken a lot of it out. I was pained this morning when I heard about our governor has ordered all of the teachers to box up their books in the classroom because if they get taught teaching something inappropriate that wasn't approved by whatever council, it's a third-degree felony. So it's like, okay, teachers are being threatened about books in their classrooms. Those teachers didn't bring those books in the classrooms. However they got there, they're not responsible. So why are you punishing the teachers? They have enough on them already. So I don't know where our education system is going, but here's what really pains me the most. We're just one state. If our governor has his way in the state of Florida, if he gets away with that, can you imagine what other states will follow suit?
Well, I can imagine what other states would follow suit if their governor thinks like this governor. But
Mm-hmm.
if there are states where other governors look at what he's doing as uh, blatant, for lack of a word, racism, if you want to call it that, or you want to uh, make it one-sided where people aren't given the full story, you just want them to learn parts of the story. For those conscientious governors who don't see it from his vantage point, as Ron DeSantis is making this turn on our educational system, and the people on the Florida State Board of Education are in agreement with him, then yes, it could be detrimental. I asked the question recently, how many people of color, how many blacks sit on the Florida Department of Education board that make decisions in tandem with the governor about what's going on in our schools? And again, this has probably been one of the problems that many states are faced with when there's an imbalance of the people who make the decisions for all. You have a diverse group of citizens in your state, but you have one side making the decisions for the diverse, which is that's not fair either. So that, along with the mindset of a Ron DeSantis and some other governors, Abbott out in Texas, who have this mindset that we don't need to be teaching certain things. Well, if they were under the same microscope and were not taught some of the things they were taught, how educated would they be? You can't deny history. History is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
History is something that really, when you talk about history, history is spoken in past content, something that happened. And then when they say they're making history, as they're making it, it becomes the past because that happened is not happening. It happened. So you can't deny what has been. you can't deny the situations that we've had to live through and go through in this country, in this state. So it's unfortunate that we have the mentality of a governor like this who is just weighing so heavily on the educational system and taking out on our teachers.
Hmm. And this is why it is important to bring your books back into your homes and not rely on the internet. The internet is good, so I don't want anyone thinking that, but the internet can also be limiting what your child learns, meaning that the results are how they're laid out. So the truth may be in the millionth result part of what came back, but your child's attention span is only going to go through the first three.
Hmm.
So your child is not getting the full scope of what the information truly is. And, the way is out there now, they're allowed to play around with that of, scaling back what is, So this is why we're talking about the encyclopedias today. This is why I'm letting you know that you can get a digital encyclopedia. I can imagine what the volumes would look like if they were actually delivered to your home. Just with our former president alone, he upset history so much
Can
around
you can you imagine? Can you
around the
imagine
world,
what his section of the T encyclopedia, how many pages
just
that
from
would
Twitter
be?
alone.
Okay, uh, in encyclopedia, if they put him, the president, when they do the president, they got his picture, the history, and all these other things. Can you imagine what that would read like, and how do you really deal with a situation where a guy did as much as he did during his presidency, since his presidency, that is of such demeanor of low morals, low integrity? Uh, how do you write all that up and say that he was the president? It's like, wow.
Hmm. Just with the Twitter account,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
so much stuff.
Yeah. Well, this is the Kitchings Table here on WBISLP 106.9, and we're always happy to be with you. I'm Earl Kitchings, the host. Joining me as we've had in the for 2023, I'll say, Ronline Cannady. So grateful for her. Thank you to the staff and management of WBIS for allowing us to have this space to chat and conversate with you and bring you today's topic. You can follow us on social media also, YouTube, Facebook Live, Roku, and GPAC 23. Our topic today, we're talking about encyclopedias. Encyclopedia, the meaning, the definition of encyclopedia is complete instruction. Complete instruction. And these books were providing that for many, many, many children during the years of, I would say, the 60s until the internet came online, because this was the only way to gather information aside from reading books on them. And they were the predecessor to the internet and online learning and Wikipedia and all the other advantages of getting information. So that's what we're talking about today. And Ronline, when we talk about making sure that our parents understand the importance of teaching as much as they can at home, not leaving everything up to school, but to, as they say, give your child some extra credit.
Yes, because there's a war on education. I mean, and it has been brewing. They've stuck on about taking prayer out of schools. Well, it's coming farther than that now. And I'm seeing it. You mentioned, I was talking about Florida because of what I heard in the news this morning that just vexed my spirit even more so. But then what got me the most is not only our governor here in Florida, But as you mentioned, Texas, the
Mm.
governor there, and all of the things that they have done, those two people alone. Not to mention, I'm thinking it's going to catch on fire with Alabama as well. So, with those three targets, and then for the state of North Carolina, I know we have a lot of passionate African American politicians out there. They're always making noise. But if they find themselves in the same educational sweep, I'm hoping that they're not sitting idly by like it seems like our people are here in Florida, just allowing things to happen. I'm hoping that they, that they're able to bring it together and say, oh no, we have some power too. We're going to exercise our power, whatever power that they do have, to make sure their educational system stay intact. And so it was interesting. If we want to do this as the pantry, it was interesting wherein Ron DeSantis wants to silence the African American history in the classroom and then sanction the teachers if they teach the information or what have you that's in the history book that made it to the classroom. The teacher didn't bring it to the classroom. It's in their whatever curriculum that they had to teach from. So all of a sudden, this is not good. So what I was into the pantry, we're going to talk about Ron DeSantis' background. We discovered that his ancestry is Italian. So, with all of the things that the Italians done to contribute to history, are we supposed to silence that too?
Well, that's a good question because when we talk about the other ethnic cultures in the world, you only are wanting to silence those of the African descent. And again, the hypocrisy of what he's doing and wanting to do going forward, because you want to only minimize one culture, but everybody else is okay. You talk about this is not what you want children to learn about, but it's the history. You don't want them to see images of black people hanging from trees, because that would not paint a good picture, but that is what happened. So
Right.
you don't want the children to see the people standing around watching the lynchings and saying, well, that wasn't really the way it happened. Well, you want to really dissuade truth. That's to me, that's what it sounds like he wants to do. He doesn't want truth to be put out there for people or children to learn about it. But Ronline, as they always say, the truth will come to the light, and the light is going to shine, and the children will find a way to get this information and learn it, whether he wants to minimize it or not. And when his time is up in office, I hope that we can have a better leader who is more in tune with the diversity of the state, as opposed to just seeing things from one slanted view. Uh, the, the educational system, teachers are already wanting to not be in the teaching profession because of the pay grades. Now you want to give them another reason to step away. And then from the public school sector, what happens when the amount of teachers diminishes to the point where schools have to go to some crazy system of being open for a certain amount of hours because you don't have enough teachers to teach information? What happens then? Uh, Everything starts to break down. The society as a whole starts to break down. And you can make it so that your culture or your group gets everything, but when they step out into the real world and deal with the rest of the world, then they're going to get an awakening that they aren't ready for.
Yes. So with that said, I thought about what I heard on the news, wherein he's attacking the teachers for the union. You know how the union, how they're paying their union dues, and to silence them while they're on, while they're working. You know, like, hey, everything's supposed to be all right. They have to pretend like it's okay. They don't have anyone to reach out to or whatever. So now, is the union going to be available for them? After hours? Probably not.
Mhm.
So it's like, okay, how do your voice get heard? And I think you used the term when we were talking about it earlier today, um, bullying, because this is a war on the educational system, but it's also a war on the teachers and being bullied. I remember during the pandemic when he was ordering the teachers to stay in the classrooms, you know, with all of this going on, people getting sick, you know, that kind of thing. And then he said, I'm going to withhold your money, you know, if you don't teach. Like these people don't have families, like they're not human beings as well, you know.
Right.
So I've seen all kind of things, and I just could not understand how in the world did he was able to get back in office. I mean, it's like, you know, we must have a shortage of teachers already that must have forgotten, you know, that they need to go to the polls as well to make sure that we receive a better leader. And that's what we need across all 50 states, you know, better leaders. And this is why we need to be teaching our children not to be afraid of government, but to be able to step to government so that they can be groomed as leaders, so that they will be able to, um, bring for themselves and their families, their generations to come, a better economy, a better school system, a better everything.
Well, we do have challenges, and it is important that we educate our children beyond just what they may learn in school. And as we look at leaders who represent the multitude, not always representing everyone with their positions and their politics, but because they got voted in, uh, they tend to carry the banner. You know, he's the governor of Florida, but he doesn't, represent my viewpoints and my thoughts and things of that nature. But he's still the governor. So it's a real challenge in this date and time in 2023 as we go forward to see how things will play out. It's unfortunate that the teachers unions are being bombarded with these type of challenges. It's sad that our teachers who have given each and every day that they're in the classroom are bombarded with the challenges of what you should and should not teach. It's sad that we don't have fair representation on our state board to let the board and the state hear from every culture and every ethnicity about uh, what is of value and what is good. We only get it from one perspective. So the challenge continues, but just like the challenge that we faced when we were growing up of learning in school, we persevered. We had people to help us persevere. And the perseverance that we are now faced with, we must continue in some form or fashion to make a new way and a better way for a new and better day. So we want to continue to talk about, what's important to our children, but of course, the literacy part is the key to it. Our parents, grandparents, and ancestors saw the key for the betterment, not just of Black people, but the betterment of society as a whole was based on education and
Mhm.
based on the facts, based on truth, and based on the things that happen in history. You can't go back and change something that happened. You can't go back and change the results of the Civil War. It's over. It's been over for a long time. You can't go back and change any of that. But you don't have to carry the negatives forward. You don't have to carry those slanted views forward that only see it from one perspective. And that's what we must continue to fight for.
You're absolutely right. And so at this time, I want to take the time to recognize Nicole Hannah Jones for her work that she's doing with the 1619 project. Um, for those that don't know anything about that, just research so that you can get an idea of the message that she's trying to help us to get recentered on about how the USA became to be, and how and what our roots were in that part, the sacrifices that were made over the centuries, before we got to where we are today. And maybe, just maybe, we can have a different perspective of what we need to do in order to bring our generations forward. Well, not with just hope, but with everything that they need. And we talked a little bit about wealth, being wealthy versus being rich. So I do want to delve into that on one of these segments going forward so that people can really understand what we need here in America in order to do the things that needs to be done, because wealthy is far more as a seeds being rich. So being wealthy, you can pass that on for generations. Being rich, that might just last you for while you're living today, but when you die tomorrow, all of that is gone. So thank you so much for bringing that out last week, and I definitely getting things together now to really get into that. Starting out with the basics, because what you said was so key. When I talked to you about the conversations that I'm having with my clients, and so it's like, okay, some things just go right over their head. But if you bring and if you bring things out in front to be able to explain them well, to get them to thinking about the real picture of how it can benefit them. And everybody's always looking for what's in it for me. So when you're looking at it from that perspective and what's in it for your generations to come, I think that makes all the difference in the world.
Well, I agree. And real quick, because we only got about a minute left, what is the significance of 1619?
1619 gives you that idea that we didn't just show up. Our contribution of how we made it through these years, and to have some sense of pride that was robbed from us. So it gives you that historical events of what happened, how we were brought here, how we were sold, what we were made to do, our ancestors, that is, and what we're seeing right now of trying to silence our vote, trying to silence us, period.
And the year 1619, for those who may not recognize what that year means, is when it was documented that the first slaves came to America. And one of the things I'll say, Ronline, before we close, if you ever run into a subject matter that you're having a hard time trying to explain, find an analogy, a simple analogy, and use the analogy in order to make the explanation a little bit clearer for the person to understand. And then when that analogy hits and sinks in, the light bulb goes off and they recognize. That's one thing that I tend to do. Take an analogy, right? Put it out there and make it happen. Well, I do thank you for all that you brought to us today, Ronline. Thank you so very much. And we'd like to thank you for joining us here today on the Kitchings Table here on Awesome Radio, WBISLP 106.9. Check us out on our social media platforms, Roku, GPAC, Facebook, and YouTube. So for Ronline Cannady, this is Earl Kitchings saying until next Tuesday, do something good for somebody else. Have a great week.
Goodbye.